All right, I'm back with another marathon video. This is one that I promised last week where I would do sort of a ultimate analysis of how this alpha went. This is not my personal opinion of how I played the game or if I enjoyed the game. I did that already. I did sort of do this analysis in an article, but I'm realizing there isn't a ton of crossover between my articles and people who just consume things on YouTube, which is fine. So if I do repeat some stuff, that's why. Everyone's saying that I'm being, overly negative about Marathon, and just not just me. There's like this spiral of negativity that is not warranted. This didn't go well. There's not really a way to get around that. And people are like, well, you want Marathon to fail, clearly. No, I don't. I would much rather cover a successful game for years than a game that fails and dies and also has the potential to hurt the other game I cover all the time. So no, I really do not want Marathon to fail. It is too early to say that, but coming out of this alpha, I am very concerned about this game's prospects based on what I'm seeing kind of out there, not just what I personally experienced, but just the overall vibe and impression of how this went. This alpha was not supposed to exist in this format. It was supposed to be a closed NDA'd alpha as opposed to a closed normal alpha where you could stream gameplay, where you could talk about it. Literally, the NDA was like, it's not just you couldn't record footage, you couldn't even talk about it. Like, you couldn't even give your impressions on it, which, how is that going to be enforced? And, I've been told that Bungie assumed there were going to be some amount of leaks there, but it would be more limited than just making it open. But I think what changed their minds was the reception to the big Marathon gameplay reveal, where everyone was like, this doesn't look amazing. There was this super awesome cinematic, but that is not the game. The game does not look like that. Does not really play like that in the same sense. So looking at actual gameplay there, everyone was not the most impressed with that. So the idea was like, okay, well, let's give it everyone's hands on it. And then if they like it, then they'll say that. This was always a risk because if they didn't really like it, then they'd say that. And it would kind of cement the gameplay is not great narrative, which I think is kind of exactly what happened. I'll say up front, this is not to say nobody liked the Marathon beta. I know a lot of people did, or alpha. I know a lot of people did like it. I know some people think it's promising. But if we're doing a percent here, it's what, 70-30, 80-20, 90-10, mostly mixed to negative over positive. I've said this before, but the group I think I've seen the most positive reaction from are Destiny PvP players that like Bungie, shooters at baseline, but also the prospect of PvP. I don't know how big a group that is, but there's the other side of like hardcore extraction people. We're not really on board. Like, you see the Tarkov people come over and they're like, you can revive people from duffel bags and there's all these hero abilities and all this. Like, that's crazy. But then on the other side, the more casual people that are like, well, it's a Bungie shooter. I love Bungie shooters. I'm going to try. Running into the idea of losing all your gear, playing against, ultra geared players that you don't really have a chance against. That is an easy way to bounce off. And in terms of what we saw from, how this alpha went over time, in terms of just actual players, I don't care about the literal player count. A couple thousand people playing it is whatever, because, these were very limited alpha codes. And one big issue with this is a lot of really, really mad people that they didn't get a closed alpha code. If we're talking about 90% negative, 10% positive, 90% people probably didn't get codes, 10% of people did. This was added, doubly frustrating because Bungie kept saying they were introducing more and more codes, but it did not really feel like that. And then you would get like friend codes and then send them to your friends, but then sometimes your friends wouldn't get actual codes. It was just like a chance for them to get a code. And I know for a fact they sent out more codes to console players over PC. I know they're really, really going for the console market because there's not really a super, super high profile extraction shooter there. And I think they want to fill that space. There are a couple, but they want to be like the big one. I don't think they're going to shy away too much from PC because that's obviously a big market for extraction, but that was maybe part of the code issue. Even then I didn't see a bunch of console people being like, yo, I got my Marathon code, like, thanks. Like some people, but clearly not enough. And then if they're, even with multiple code waves and even with a big mid alpha patch, there was some balance there. There was, pulling the two super geared and less geared groups together. There was the getting rid of the aim assist for, PC play, which was a huge thing that, like, quote, normal shooters, like people aren't playing Destiny or whatever, played, and they're like, this is ridiculous. Like, how would you play this? And then they kind of bounced off there. They did fix that, but that did not make players go up. The last thing that's happening today is for like a day and a quarter, Bungie is running some sort of quote unquote stress test after they extended the alpha by like 2 days. They're making enemy AI harder, and then they're unlocking a bunch of faction upgrades so you can see how the game plays, I guess, more toward the end of a season. But they're like, oh, also servers may go offline, you may lose all your gear, and I don't know. I don't imagine like a ton of people are going to be jumping in for this, but maybe the player count will go up. I don't know. But the end result of this is, in terms of the trend line, I think this is ending up at 20%, if not less, of the players that originally started playing, when it first launched. And even more kind of absurd is this is a game that launched with something like 140,000 Twitch viewers, as everyone was very curious to check this out. A number of big streamers really were giving this a shot, from Shroud to XQC to these people. As far as I know, those weren't sponsored. It was just generally, maybe there's some sponsor, but like, it was like, this is a new Bungie shooter. This is interesting to me. That fell very quickly to somewhere between 3,000 to 6,000, and like sometimes you'd see like Asdacross online and he was like 3,000 of the 6,000. I've seen it down to like 1,000. If you don't have a code and you want to see how this game looks in action, you would imagine you'd be watching streams, but that's not happening. I don't view streams as like as good of a metric as player trends and gameplay, but that's a pretty significant decline. So I do think that's worth at least noting. And then, halfway through this closed alpha, there was another closed alpha that was Arc Raiders. It is a much, much, much more traditional extraction shooter in the vein of Tarkov, albeit a bit more accessible. Has all the extraction shooter things, your third person, which a lot of people view as a negative. I kind of do too. But it feels much more like, extraction shooters set in the Fallout world, kind of. There's some interesting PvE enemies. The game has really awesome sound design. It's probably the best I've seen in a PvP game in a while. And you have traditional extraction things like crafting and a home base and prox chat and all this stuff that you come to expect that Marathon does not have. And, I just wrote an article about how Arc players, that alpha went up every single day. Some of that may be codes that they were being less stingy with, but also very clearly that had a lot more positive word of mouth, and happening directly on top of the Marathon alpha, which had a largely negative word of mouth. That's not good. This did not play out well. And like, even if the Marathon alpha was excuse me, even if the Marathon alpha was, not going as well as as it could have at baseline, that is still that's an extra layer on top of this that what was making this even more kind of brutal for them. The other issue here is that what feels like is wrong with the game to a certain extent are not really things that can be easily fixed, if they can be fixed at all. There's a lot of like, well, this is a closed alpha. How can you judge this game by a closed alpha? This build is 6 months, or is 1 month old, 2 months old, and the game comes out in 5 months. There is a lot of like polishing that can be done. I'm not going to harp on the visuals too much. Like the outer visuals, character model visuals were obviously very bad. The interiors were great, but there's a lot of work to be done there. Clearly, balance is not really there yet, and that's obviously something that PvP games are always going to be in search of. But we're talking about things that what is coming does not seem like it's going to move the needle. So there's two more maps. Right now, it seems like the maps are kind of a stepping stool. Like you gear up in Perimeter, and then you go to the Dire Marsh, which is harder, and then probably the next map is harder, and then there's going to be this end game map, to whatever that exactly means, on the Marathon ship. So my question is, how many players will actually stick around long enough to get there? If it's something they have to be like super ultra geared for, that is going to be a very small percentage of players, and depending on how many people get this game, probably a small amount of players, period. And then there's going to be 2 new heroes that are added. There's 4 already. I don't think the hero thing landed. There was always some concern about the idea of heroes in a genre like this. I think this is a big issue, and this is one of the things that won't be fixed. Like, they're not going to change that model now. It's much too late for that. But it's not just that there's hero kits, it's what they've given these hero kits that just seems so counter to the genre. There's at least 3 of these kits. Like, you have Blackbird, which has literal wall hacks, which is so counter to everything an extraction shooter is, like trying to hunt down these enemies, and like, people are waiting to ambush you and stuff like that. Just totally, not something that you would expect to have in this genre, and something that kind of ruins a lot of fights in some ways. You have Glitch, where it's like they just gave one character much more insane mobility than everyone else. This is generally a pretty slower paced shooter. I've described it as slow Apex, and people are all like, well, this isn't like Apex. Screw you. It is a lot like Apex in a lot of these fights. It's just slower, but that changes when you have someone like Glitch, who just has all these mobility moves and reduce your heat a little bit, and it's like a totally different game for that one character. I would say worst of all is Void, which has, he has stealth on a pretty short cooldown. Not even just Destiny stealth, like full cannot see him at all stealth. And I just saw a clip of like Void stealth rampage with a shotgun. It's like, what are you even gonna do about that? Like, I've seen more than most, like these full teams of Voids where you're getting in a team fight and you're just, what are you going to do against 3 characters that are almost, constantly invisible? This seems like this has no place in the genre. And I know a long time ago they had like custom characters, which seems better, but allegedly the game at that point was also just bad. Like, it was like the Chris Barrett version, which, sounded cool in theory before he was fired, whatever, but like everything I know is like that actual game was also not good. It like was not coming together. So they have Ziggler. Ziggler is from Valorant, obviously, and he's like, well, let's do heroes. And I don't think any potential player was like, yeah, this rules. Like, let's do a hero extraction shooter. And here we are, and it's too late to change that if it doesn't work. And so far, without some serious balance and some big toning down of some of these abilities, I think that's a big problem. So then we move on to something like solo play. This is something that will, if it worked, would make the game more accessible. Designing an entire game around the idea that you're going to be playing in a pre-made threes group with your friends that are on, mic with each other, that's such a bad idea. Like, this is not how most people game at this point. Like, it isn't. And if you base something around that, and solo players are relegated to, just skulking around, trying to avoid all combat essentially, or else you're just going to get screwed, that gets old very fast. There are some good experiences to be had with, you being a random on a team that's autofills. I had some good games like that. I've also had some terrible games like that, because you are heavily reliant on the skill and decision making of these other players, often who will not be on mic, I don't know, 80% of the time from what I found. And, you just have to kind of play for yourself in a lot of ways. Like, doing true teamwork in a lot of those matches is tough. idea that one of your teammates can screw up from no fault of your own and you're going to lose your entire kit because they did something obviously bad, or you're going to screw up and screw it up for them too. On top of that, there's this idea that you're completing these contracts, but if you're playing with these other random players, some person needs to go here, some person needs to go there. So either you're just not getting done what you want to get done, or you're splitting up your team and everyone dies. Based on this alpha, I don't think the fact that it's a closed alpha that is not finished is a reason to dismiss these very, very major problems with the game that do not feel like they're going to be fixed for launch or anytime soon. Hero idea, never going away. Never gonna be deleted, nothing like that. The core concept of an extraction shooter, losing your loot, going against higher tiered players, never going away. So if that just doesn't appeal to you, you're out. Solos, they're like, well, we're not opposed to solos, but they're like, well, we're going to balance solos based on how it feels if all your teammates die and you're alone. It's like, awesome. But they've said repeatedly, like, we designed this with threes in mind. You know, this is what we're doing. And great, but not great. So I come out of this very concerned. It feels like there's going to be at least one more alpha test, maybe a closed alpha, and then there should be an open beta in August. Then there's launch. And with all of this, you got to pay $40 for it. And if you want to play it ideally, you got to make your friends spend $40 on it, and you have to have your friends available to play whenever you want to play if you want an optimal experience here. That is a tough end of the road here. And I do not want this to fail in the least. I really don't. I know people personally working on the game. That would be brutal. This failing in a high profile way would be a huge disaster for Bungie in every possible way. This game has been worked on for 6, 7, 8 years in some form or another. One of the issues is this current version was rebooted 2 years ago to some extent, which is kind of what it feels like. And that's never good when that happens. It is hard to be positive coming out of this. I think there are some good aspects. I still think the art design, when polished, will look good. I like the sound design. Some of the gunplay feels good. I like the idea of fighting AI bots. That's kind of fun. But there's just so many large-scale problems here. So let me know what you think in the comments, what you thought of the alpha, and all of the people who did not get codes can complain about not getting codes, for which I don't blame you, because this code thing has been awful too. Anyway, thank you for watching, and I'll talk to you soon. Take care.